Gracious and loving God, may only your words be spoken. May only your words be heard. Amen.
Amen.
When I would meet with a couple who were preparing for marriage, I would remind them that all it would really take for them to be married before God was the two of them, a couple of witnesses, me and God. Everything else was detail. Everything else was meant to highlight that central truth, to focus the gathered community on what really mattered, to magnify the joy on their hearts for everyone to see in the form of decorations and dresses and cake and DJs and bands. But ultimately, all they really needed to make the marriage work was the two of them and God. The two of them and God were to be the stars of the show on their wedding day. The two of them and God were the only things, ultimately, that mattered. But as we know, the wedding industry is fierce, and social media competition can be contagious. And so weddings become complicated and expensive. Sometimes they can become so extravagant that the event itself, and not the couple, becomes the center of attention. My heart would break for couples who let the details become the main event. I hated to watch a couple chase that perfect wedding day only to see that rain cloud gather or that flower wilt. Our lives, I think, can often be a bit like a couple preparing for their marriage. Over time, we come to believe that the wholeness we seek in our lives might be found in the details, in the stuff. And we lose sight of the fact that all it really matters to make life whole, all it really takes is us and God. All it takes for a life of peace is you and God. All it takes for a life of joy is you and God. All it takes for a life of healing is you and God. And all it takes for a life of hope, you and God. The rest, my friends, they're just details. The rest of life is meant, like the rest of a wedding ceremony, to continually point us back to God at the center of our lives. And yet, the details become the very things we seek. And in seeking the details, we find we are moving further and further away from God at the center of our lives. We make our lives so much more complicated, even as we claim to want lives that are simpler. In Matthew's gospel we heard tonight, Jesus is telling his followers to keep the main thing the main thing. Keep it simple. Keep God at the center. Whatever you do, do it for God. Don't worry about showing off for others. Don't try to earn points or get that gold star. Keep God at the center, because the rest is just details. When you are longing in your life, long for God. Do not fill that longing with more stuff. When you don't feel like you are enough, do not seek the approval of others. Like the stuff of our lives, the need to please others, to get more likes on social media, to be better at something than others, all that accumulates on our hearts like plaque. When you are sad, invite God into your sadness. Don't ignore your sadness or try to numb yourself to it, but make room in it for God. When you're angry, argue with God. Trust me, God can take it. Don't take your anger out on someone else where it doesn't really belong. This season of Lent we enter tonight, it's a gift that the church gives us every year to hit a reset button of sorts on our relationships with the God who loves us. It is a season in which we take stock of how much stuff we have accumulated in our desires to be happy or fulfilled that really only now act as distractions from our relationships with God at the very center and core of our lives. The reason for a Lenten discipline, if that is your thing, the reason for giving something up or taking on something new, it's not meant to be a self-help exercise. It's meant to be a God help me exercise. It is not about suffering for suffering's sake. It's about reminding ourselves how much we ultimately are in need of God. And we need to be reminded that we need God because most of us live lives in which we have the privilege to forget just how dependent on God we really are, until life reminds us. And our privilege and our creature comforts, they cannot save us then. The times in my life when I recall having a real sense of God at the center, when my prayer life was strong or stronger than it usually is, they're also the times when my life was the most challenging. When I was watching a loved one laying in a hospital bed, unsure if they would live or die. When I was a parent of a teenager, watching my child struggle with those twists and turns of adolescence. The first year after I was ordained a priest in the church, and the needs of the world seemed overwhelming. And in the days and months following my election as your bishop. In each of these seasons of my life, whatever details I had latched onto as seemingly important, they weren't able to sustain me. They weren't able to give me the strength or the peace or the hope I needed to meet the days that were in front of me. These seasons reminded me, like Lent is meant to, that ultimately I could do nothing in those moments but place my whole self in front of the God who loves me and ask for help. But in life, hard times come, and hard times often go. And as my life got easier, I had the luxury to get distracted once again by the details of my life. And before too long, God would get pushed from the center by other important stuff. The ashes we wear on our foreheads remind us that we are dust, and to dust we shall return. They remind us not only that we are mortal, but that we come from the very heart of God. And it is to the heart of God that we will return. It is in God's heart that we are home. The French philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote, quote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." We are on loan, if you will, to the bodies we inhabit while walking this earth. But our true home is with God. Our place of true belonging is in the heart of the God who loves us. Our challenge in this life is how to place ourselves in the heart of God while moving through the details of our earthly lives. Until we can once again reside in the heart of God, our invitation then is to allow God to reside in ours. Lent can be a time to practice doing just that, to practice making room once again in our hearts and in our lives for God to come in and take up residence, not as some afterthought, but as the main thing, as the first thing, as the only thing that really matters. And so I invite you, all of you, to the practice of a Holy Lent. I pray you might spend these next 40 days in a wilderness abounding in grace. I pray you find a practice that will help you remember that ultimately none of the details matter. And I pray you come to know just how much God longs to take up residence at the center of your life, if we will only make the room. Amen.